Good afternoon. The public meeting of the Vallecitos Water District for April 17th, 2024 will come to order. Before we begin, I'd like to announce that members of the public may watch the meeting live via computer or smart device by going to the district's website and clicking on the Watch Live icon. However, they will not be able to participate in the meeting remotely. Members of the public may also listen to the meeting live on their phone by dialing 888-788-0099 toll-free or 877-853-5247, also toll-free. When prompted, enter the meeting ID and passcode displayed on the district's website. I will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand. Ready? Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We will move on to take attendance. Directors, please indicate your attendance. Great. We are all here. Thank you. Do we have any additions to the agenda?
No, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Then may I have a motion to adopt the agenda for April 17th, 2024?
So moved.
So moved by Director Elithar.
Second.
Seconded by Director Hernandez. Any discussion? Seeing none, please vote. And the agenda has been adopted. Thank you. Moving on to public comment. Do we have any public comment this evening?
No, ma'am.
Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to consent items. May I have a motion to adopt the consent calendar as presented?
So moved.
So moved by Vice President Pennock. May I have a second?
Seconded.
Seconded by Director Grosset. Any discussion? Seeing none, please vote. And the consent items are passed. Thank you. Moving on to action items. Action item 2.1, Asset Management Plan Project Completion.
Yes, thank you, Madam President. So the asset management program's been in place for a while, and there are several factors, several key elements to it, but one of the items that is most pressing is what we call the AMP, the Asset Management Plan. As the board's aware, this has been going on, and we've been working on this asset management plan for a good portion of a year, and I believe it's been to engineering committee twice. I believe Director Eltharp has seen a version of this presentation maybe twice, and both Directors Grosset and Hernandez has seen it once. But today, we're going to present the finalization of this, and one of the things we're going to be asking the board to do is a consideration of the funding for the asset management plan and the results of it. So take that in mind as you go through this presentation. You'll see different levels of funding, different options available, and the meaning of what that means for the long-term sustainability for our district assets. With that, let me hand it over to Jason Hubbard, our district engineer.
All right, thank you, General Manager Gumpel. Good evening, members of the board. We're excited to present this for you tonight. Before Eric begins, I kind of wanted to just set the stage for you a little bit. For the board members who haven't seen this presentation, I know those who are in the Engineering Equipment Committee, they saw this several times, but a lot of charts, a lot of graphs. I'll be honest, it could be a little bit dry, it could be a little bit nebulous, but I don't want you to think we're in a competition with Wes on who can put you to sleep the fastest. So this is not the budget party, but we're very excited about what we're going to show you tonight. So as Eric goes through his presentation, we talk about this asset management plan. What I want you to think about is it's not the typical plan that we bring before you for engineering. So this is not a plan to install a pipeline. This is not a plan to refurbish a tank. This is a plan looking at our process and how we can improve how we collect data. It's a plan for what we're going to do with that data, how we're going to manage and track that data, how that data is going to, we're going to evaluate and assign risk to our assets. This is a plan on how we look at those risks and how do we budget and reduce and mitigate those. So I'm hoping you can look at this plan through that lens. And you know, somebody once said, little things make big things happen. And I'll give you the perfect asset management example of this. Like General Manager Gumpel said, we began this program in 2017. And at that time, the GM was a district engineer, and he was working with me as the senior engineer, and we started looking at how are we going to collect this data. And one of the things we did is we put together a form that our construction crew would fill out when they would respond to leaks. And they would fill out all the information related to that leak, what caused it, the condition of the pipe. And in the first couple of years we had this data, it wasn't doing much, right? But over 6 years now, we've got all this data, and now we have a map where we can plot where these leaks are occurring. We can look at clusters, we can look at trends. We're still not doing a lot, but that data is going up into our asset management model, and now we can look at criticality of our assets. We're actually uploading this into an AI software and looking at predictive models. So there's a lot that can come from these little things that we're doing. So look at this program as that. We're building on something here. This is a roadmap. This plan is a roadmap. It's a generational roadmap. It's not, or I should say, it is a long game that we're looking at. And we're looking at short wins as well. And Eric's going to illustrate that in his presentation. These wins are something we're really trying to capitalize. And as you know, asset management as a concept is one of the district's strategic plans. And the development of this asset management plan is a tactical initiative that we've been working on. And I want to give credit to Eric. As you know, he got promoted to the the assistant O&M manager. So he left engineering a year ago, and he's still carrying the ball. And he's carrying it across the finish line. And this is a big milestone for this. But this is not the end of the story. This presentation is not the end of the story. It's really the beginning. And I want you to know that this plan is going to be refined. It's going to be scrutinized. It's going to be modified as we move forward, working with the board on strategies, working on how can we improve the data we get and what do we do with it. So with that, I'll let Eric get into the weeds.
Just before you start, you teed that up very well, and I'm thinking that maybe instead of peanuts, we should have had popcorn.
Oh.
Because this is super exciting. I don't think you should sell this short at all. This is a tremendous undertaking.
Maybe Wes can take some cues. I'm just
I mean, we're talking about data, and this is going to help us make informed and scientific decisions, and I fully appreciate that, and I'm glad that you also mentioned AI. So I'm looking forward to this presentation, and I'll pretend like this is popcorn. So thank you.
appreciate that.
I hope there's plenty of butter and salt in those peanuts. All right. So, good evening, directors. I'm here to provide an update on the findings of our asset management plan, or the AMP. This project, as it's coming to a close, we would like to take time to review it, some of the key concepts that are needed to understand the components and the results of this plan, some of the funding strategies that are a result of analysis, and next steps for the asset management department and the district as a whole. Why isn't it going?
All this data, we can't advance the slides.
Yeah.
Move to the other screen and you can click on it.
Okay, there we go. Thank you. All right, we will begin by reviewing a brief project overview and its key findings. Then we'll take a look at risk-based decision-making and how that plays into the long-term and the short-term renewal and replacement forecast, as well as the funding. And then we will take a look at those forecasts and see where we're at. And then we will take a look at how condition-based replacement planning can assist the district with its goals over the long term. And finally, next steps for asset management in the district as a whole. To accomplish the goal of developing the asset management plan, the district partnered with the consulting firm Black & Veatch, who are here with us today, who guided staff through numerous exercises, workshops, and extensive data requests. During the project, we participated in meetings where Black & Veatch helped determine and review our current levels of service, understand our desired levels of service, and then benchmark those against industry standards and made recommendations to implement. These recommendations include routinely testing of our large meters, completing our asset inventory in our CMS and GIS systems, and regular updates of this asset management plan. Another part of the project was to perform desktop condition assessments of various assets and asset classes from all of our systems. This included water mains, sewer mains, pump stations, tanks, reservoirs, and our Meadowlark reclamation facility. These assessments involved multiple meetings and workshops with district staff in many O&M departments, to use their in-depth knowledge of our systems and assign scores to our assets, which would then be later used in the risk analysis. Along with this, Black & Veatch assisted the district with identifying data gaps in our GIS and CMMS systems and developed asset fact sheets to help us better track our assets. As mentioned earlier, we performed a risk analysis where, excuse me, where consequence and likelihood of failure scores were assigned to various assets. These scores were then later used to help produce a 75-year funding forecast and a renewal and replacement forecast that you will see later. And lastly, Black & Veatch recommended next steps for our asset management department in the district.
I just want to jump in, as Eric was mentioning, we're trying to capture some of that institutional knowledge that our operations folks know. As you know, we're having this silver tsunami where we're losing that knowledge. So how do we get that knowledge out of our brain space and into the digital space? And that's part of those workshops that was a part of this process for the AMP.
Okay. So what we have here is one of the key findings from this asset management plan, and which played a major part in the development of it and the funding and renewal and replacement forecasts. As you can see, the Vallecitos, we have a relatively young system with 84% of our assets having 10 or more years of remaining useful life. Capitalizing on the fact that our systems are relatively young when compared to other utilities, we have a bit of a buffer space, and that in the next decade or so, to allow us to analyze our assets, map out the upcoming needed replacements, and accurately plan for funding them without feeling like we have major or immediate needs to tackle. This allows us to grow the asset management program, collect better data, and then gain a better understanding of our assets, their conditions, and then plan accordingly.
I have a question. For the benefit of myself and the public, can you give an example of a vertical asset, please?
Yeah, a vertical asset would be something considered, say, a pump station or a water tank, a reservoir. Yeah. Okay. Okay. And for this next section, we will briefly review risk analysis and risk-based decision making. And for this, I will hand it over to Christopher McGrath with Black & Veatch.
Thank you, Eric. Good evening, directors. So before we jump into the results of the 75-year plan we put together, I want to take a moment to kind of talk through the process. How do we get there when it comes to developing risk? On the screen, what you'll see is the preliminary layout of a risk matrix. Bottom left corner is lowest risk. Upper right corner is your highest risks. Before we get into risk, though, it's what are the two elements of risk? And it's consequence of failure and the likelihood of failure. Consequence is driven by the impacts it has to the district, whether it's your customers, your revenue streams, safety to the employees, what have you. The likelihood of failure is driven by primarily your condition and age of the asset. Two things. One, you know how old it is, and the other, you can find out through condition assessment. Those are what drive the risk scoring. So what we did for the district is we looked at all of the district's assets in groups. In an example, though, I want to show is the tank. And when that tank is constructed, it has a consequence of failure to the district of 2. And that score is developed through conversation and workshops with staff, understanding the potential redundancy that the tank has, or maybe the smaller customer network it's serving. That helps to develop that score of a 2. Over time, as it ages, that likelihood of failure changes. Its consequence doesn't, but the likelihood does, pushes it out. In this example, that leads to what would be a score of an 8 on the risk matrix for that tank. Alternatively, if you look at emergency generator system, even on day 1, that has a high consequence of failure to the district. If your generator system goes down, your plant goes down, that's a problem. Over time, as it ages and the condition wears, it becomes higher risk. It moves to your highest risk potential, which is a 5x5, 25 score. So if we move on to the next slide, we'll talk about risk for the whole district and all of its assets. And the first matrix, what you see is the total of water assets. We broke the district's assets in water and wastewater for analysis purposes. Fortunately, they look very similar when you go throughout all the results. In the water assets, you have far more than 614 assets, but that was what the group sum was. That's either by system process or by segment, larger segments of pipeline. What we've done is we mapped all of the assets and their relative, the account in the first one, and then we multiply that by the risk score that's equated with that same box on the matrix, and multiply those two together to turn into what is your portfolio risk. What does it mean to the district as a whole? What is your risk? Although it's a unitless number, it helps us to set the foundation to understand how we can reduce risk through capital investment. So here you have currently today a total risk score of about 5,200 for the district. The first scenario we would run is the scenario of not doing anything. Wait till it fails, you get the phone call, you go out, you make an emergency project, you replace it, gets back in the system. That shows that over time, the maximum risk the district faces is a score of about 9,000. So now we know what the upper band is, what the potential is for the district when it comes to risk. Then we look at the alternative, or actually before we looked at, we will look at the alternative, but what we look at is how does spending affect the risk? And how do we drive down your risk to get you to a what is optimized value? Because you can spend all the money in the world, and at some point that money becomes less valuable, but there's a certain amount where you can get a lot of value out of it early on. So we did multiple scenarios as we went through the process with the team to kind of find where is that optimal amount. So before we ran those scenarios, we figured out what is the best case scenario. If you had unlimited funds, unlimited staffing, and you wanted to accomplish the lowest risk possible in the district, you'd go out and fix and replace everything as soon as you think it's going to fail. That is what the lower band on this is the best case scenario for you all. These create kind of the bookends for the district. From that, then we run the scenarios and we see where they occur in the process. The district's overall risk exposure is that area in between the two. You will never get to zero risk. As soon as you buy something, there's a risk it will fail. There's a consequence that it will fail, that it has to your lifestyle. So now we understand kind of where the bottom is, where the top is, and how we got there. We'll talk about the scenarios that we've run, and I'll give Eric the floor so he can walk you through those.
I have a question about methodology. You talked about two axes, likelihood failure and consequence of failure. It would seem that the consequence of failure is less predictable and there's more variability there. Do you factor that into your model when you're making these calculations?
What we do, we walk through with everybody in a workshop, the kind of consequences, the most common consequences.
Okay,
that
so
they
it's
fail.
research-based. It's based
Yeah.
on what has happened in other places, so it is fairly predictable.
There is a good,
Okay,
good variability.
thank you.
It comes from AWWA and as well as talking
Okay.
to staff.
And it's
Okay,
pretty,
thank you.
it's pretty straightforward. For example, if you're gonna put a hospital out, if that system fails, that's a high consequence. If you're in a major traffic or a pipeline in a major environmental corridor or underneath a freeway and explodes underneath that freeway, those are high consequences as well. A pipeline that's in a cul-de-sac in the street, if that fails, you have two people out of water, that's a lower consequence. So those are pretty standardized within the industry.
Okay, thank you.
All right, now that we have briefly discussed risk calculations and the district's worst and best case scenarios, we'll begin looking at the long-term and the short-term forecasts. So first, to understand these scenarios, we need to understand a few of the constraints which were built into the model and have impacts on the scenario results. First one I would like to point out is the desktop condition assessment. All of the data that was collected, it was through downloads from our CMS and GIS systems, those workshops. There's no actual physical condition assessments performed in the field. The next one I would like to point out is the resourcing constraints. The model has the model has the projects executed yearly at 24, and that's split between water and wastewater for the first 10 years. And after 10 years in 2035, that increases to 32 projects a year. And that will be a heavy lift for staff.
And so you can see that's not really sustainable. So the products and the analysis you see are based on these assumptions. But one of the things that Eric mentioned that's missing is a full condition assessment analysis. So towards the end of the presentation, we're going to demonstrate the potential of how that could reduce that project load, reduce the resource load, and also save the district time and money based on condition assessment kind of desktop results. Actual condition assessment being performed will provide real data that we could drive decisions from.
Okay, let's get into the scenarios. So first, we will begin with a water scenario. It is $2.5 million a year of a budget increase by 3% over 75 years. And I must note right now that it's not a standalone capital spend. This is in addition to what we are already spending. So, for example, if we were already spending, $5 million a year in capital expenditure in water, this would suggest spending $7.5 million. And that theme is going to reoccur throughout all the scenarios. Okay, so what we can see here is the top bar, the gray bar, is the do nothing, the no proactive replacement scenario, and then we have our best scenario at the bottom, which is the green line, as Christopher pointed out earlier. The scenario with the $2.5 million a year ends up right. Let me put the laser pointer on. Laser pointer ends up right here at this top line, and it comes out to a 35% risk reduction over the study period. At the end of the study period as well, as you can see from the heat map, it ends up with 29% of our assets in the critical to high priority groupings, and that's not a place that you want to be. Now I'll move to the wastewater.
So just clarification, this 2.5 million budget is just to assess?
No, I'm sorry. No, it's actually to replace assets. So the assessment is, we're going to do that at the later presentation because we don't have results from the assessments yet because we haven't done enough assessments as a district.
So that's an estimate for replacement depending on where they hit on that graph, if they're in the red.
Yes,
If they're not in the red and they're doing well, then that budget could be lower
correct.
after an assessment.
Yes.
You're jumping ahead of us now.
I know.
sorry.
You're hitting all my main points before we
Sorry.
get there.
Say, I'll go back. I'll get back to the popcorn here, sorry.
Yeah, we're trying to scare you with the big numbers, but
No,
before
did.
showing you.
It worked, it gets bigger.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
But wait, there's more. All right, so moving on to our wastewater. Again, it's a $2.5 million scenario with the budget increased by 3% over the 75 years. We have our no proactive replacements and our best case scenario. This wastewater scenario produced a 30% risk reduction over the course of the study, and it ended up with only 14% of our wastewater assets in the critical or high priority. So moving on to the next scenario, which would be water. It's a $15 million budget increase to our capital spend, and that's escalated by 2% over 75 years. And as you can see, it has the two bookends of our best case and worst case, but this scenario produced a 62% reduction in risk over the study period. And it also leaves the district in much better position than the previous scenario, leaving us with only 18% of our water assets in the critical or high priority groupings. And also this scenario produces a $6.4 million average spend over the course of the study, and that may seem low, and that's because one, there's inflation to take account for over the years, and then also, as you can see in the very beginning here, we're not really spending too much money in the first 10 years to replace our assets.
And that's because what Eric was saying earlier is that the youthfulness of our assets, so there's really not a need in those opening 10 years. In the next 10 years, we still have a long life left. That's why that's occurring.
I have a question. Would it be possible to, and maybe you did this later in the presentation, to explore some kind of smoothing of that sharp increase in the spend over the years Is that something that we could legally do if we wanted to
Absolutely.
consider a scenario like this so that we are not spending nothing and then hitting our customers very hard at the
Yeah.
end of the century?
Madam President, the presentation goes into the short term, and the short term shows how we could benefit from doing strategic replacements within those first 10 years
Okay.
and reduce our risk profile and with a different spend amount.
Thank you.
No, I was just saying, you're still in the scare us phase.
But there's many permutations of this, obviously, so there's many things that we can adjust.
Yeah, I've got a question, Eric. I'm a little bit confused, it's a 6.4 million average annual spend. How's that relate to the 15 million a year?
Again, that's because over the beginning stages, we're not spending too much for about 20 years or so.
Oh, okay.
And then on top of that, the $15 million, all this is increased with inflation. So when you calculate those two out, the average spend comes out to be $6.4 million in 2025 dollars.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I guess you could also look at it as those blue bars are actually the amount of money you'll be spending based on those years. So in 2094, if that's a $60 million number, that's $60 million in 2094 dollars.
Thanks.
Of course. Okay, so moving on to our wastewater scenario. Again, it is a $15 million budget increased by 2% over the 75 years. And as you can see, that this scenario for wastewater produced a 64% risk reduction compared to our no proactive replacements or do nothing scenario. And it left us leaves it in the district in a very good position with only 9% of our assets in the critical or the high priority groupings. So how do these scenarios compare? On the slide here, you'll see that there are some time frames, and what this is showing is the total cost of the no proactive replacement over the course of the study and what the estimated expenditure would be if we're going out there and we are just responding to emergencies, replacing water main as needed, replacing pumps when they fail, those kind of things. The total spend on this one, the no proactive replacement, is estimated to be at $1.6 billion. Okay, and it has the scenarios below that. So if you see the $2.5 billion over the end through the study, at the end, there's a projected savings of $165 million, reduced from that $1.6 billion. And then the $15 million year study or scenario produces a $364 million for water, $220 million for wastewater, and then combined total of $584 million, reduced from that no proactive replacement scenario.
So I guess this is kind of towards the end of our scary slides. So as the board can see, these are really big numbers, and the decisions on how we move forward with whether it's condition assessment or proactive maintenance and proactive replacements have lasting effects that will carry on as far as from a district standpoint for our ratepayers for generations. Because if doing nothing and being kind of stuck in a cycle where you're doing reactive replacement is the biggest consequence, and also will put the most amount of pressure on our future ratepayers. Proactive maintenance has a huge savings, and hopefully we could also show that condition assessment we could even add additional savings on top of that. So.
All right.
So just an observation, what have we been doing now? I mean, if we were to use this same graph, but we went back to like 1950 and went from 1950 to 2025, are we doing no proactive, 2.4? Are we doing anything now? Have we done up to this point, if we were going back in history, any condition assessment?
Erica, will you go back to one of the slides that show the bookends on the risk graph? Yeah, anyone's.
I'm just asking, like, what have we been doing?
So.
We have to have been doing something.
Yes,
with
we
condition
have. So one of the things that the district has benefited from is a tremendous amount of growth. And within that growth in the area, We've replaced old assets with new assets by leveraging both the development where it's appropriate. So a lot of our aging assets, not all of them, especially on the water side, go to the sewer for me if possible, have been replaced. But if you look at the sewer side, we have some significant spending coming up on sewer because a lot of those legacy assets that were built in the 60s, 70s, and 80s are in corridors that aren't being touched by new development. So it's falling on the district CIP. So we've had this opportunity where we've had the ability to replace assets in a timely manner prior to them expiring or running out of their useful life because of the growth we've seen here. But that growth is not going to last forever. Now, moving forward, though, we still have this opportunity because there's still a minimum amount of spend from now to 2045 where we could use some short-term, that short-term window to basically leverage whether it's condition assessment or proactive replacement to hopefully not only lower our risk profile but also save more money in that 75-year period.
And we're also doing condition assessment as we move along. So you may recall last fall we had an emergency break on a major transmission line out in Escondido, right? And that line was 1956. So just based on age, likelihood of failure is high. Based on consequence, customers being out, it was low. It was a redundant system, so we were able to be out for a while. But in the repair, we did an opportunistic condition assessment. We sent a camera through the pipe and found it out. It's a pretty good condition. We found like one spot we need to repair. So if I were to evaluate, I'd say, okay, well, that likelihood of failure score, that's coming back. That risk, what we thought was a high risk asset is probably lower, and that's what we get from that condition assessment. So maybe we don't need to schedule that major pipeline to be replaced at a very high cost. Now let's just spend some money doing some repairs and try to extend the life of that pipe.
Question here real quick. Moving forward, can you give us the risk score for projects you're requesting? I think that's kind of a cool thing.
Yeah, that's definitely something, and
then we can put all this work to practical use that we can all digest as well.
yeah, so one of our next steps, and we're jumping ahead, but is really to get from this, what's our top 10? What's our top 30? Where are we in the red? Where do we need to look and really prioritize as we move forward? And through condition assessment, can we move those scores down into other categories? So that's definitely something that we can do, and that's what we're looking at.
And Director Gross said, to kind of reiterate your point, we will have limited resources. We don't have an open checkbook and staffing to do every
You can
job we
estimate
can.
the score based
So
on,
yeah, that
based on
scores.
your knowledge, but
Yep.
it's kind of like a nice little, what you see in the restaurant window, A, B, C. You wouldn't go in a C restaurant. You'd know that restaurant needs some fixing, right?
Yep.
So,
Yeah, we'll be going after those Cs right away.
yeah, that's what I like to hear. And then also, this is an extremely long-term model, and you can't imagine what the year 2045 is going to look like, let alone the year 2099. At the rate AI is moving and robotics and advanced, ion lasers to dig tunnels and stuff like that, we could be in a very different world 5 years from now, let alone 70 years from now.
Well, that's why there's going to have to be a check-in and an updating of the risk profile and technologies and condition assessment opportunities coming back to the board. I don't know if that sequencing where we get relative data that's actionable is every 2 years or every 5 years until we really get into it. So this is really a long-term vision, and the modeling and the foundation that the model sets up is just the baseline. From there, we can build, and hopefully always show the baseline and show how we're beating that baseline and ideally spending less money to do it.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, so now we've seen our long-term forecast. We're going to move on to our short-term renewal replacement forecasts. And these scenarios, again, they use the no proactive replacements and our best-case scenario. And what we're going to look at with these is a zoomed-in section to the already existing forecast. And this is to tell a bit of a story to help alleviate some of your fears. So here we have the water, the 10-year zoomed-in forecast for all scenarios that that were presented, the best case, the worst case, and the 2.5 million and the 15 million. And what it shows over 10 years, if you were in the water side, if you were to implement a $2.5 million budget increase over those next 10 years on top of what we're already spending on CIP, we would see a 67% risk reduction, I should say. We could see a 67% risk reduction. Whereas if we were to implement the $15 million a year, we would only see an additional 17% risk reduction. So it comes to a point where is the return of investment going to be worth it? And that same scenario continues with our 10-year forecast for wastewater, with the $2.5 million scenario. We see a 62% risk reduction, and this one was kind of a shocker. Even with the $15 million spend, you really only see a 3% risk reduction, and that just goes to show that these zoomed in sections, they represent that key finding that was presented at the beginning of the presentation. Our systems are relatively young, 84% of them having 10 plus years of life, useful life remaining, which means in the next decade or so, we could take that time, build the asset management program, perform more condition assessments, get better data, and make better decisions in the future. So looking ahead, what strategies should the district consider for both the short term and the long term? Well, considering the risk analysis presented earlier, for the short term, we should consider tapping into a bit of our reserves, a portion of them, and boost our CIP spending. Additionally, we should plan to augment our CIP budget by $2.5 million over the next coming decade. And this is a realistic goal, and it would produce the greatest amount of return of investment in the short term.
And these are recommended goals based on without condition assessment, and these numbers could be modified, or some of that money, that $2.5 million, could be used towards condition assessment to get better data. So the amount of spend probably won't change much. It's just how we use that money and to get the best benefit out of it.
In the long term, Black & Veatch advocates for the second scenario. This entails a budgetary increase of $15 million a year on top of our CIP budget. This approach offers the highest potential for risk mitigation and has the potential to significantly enhance the district's standing in the future. And just to remember that these risk analysis and funding scenarios shown on previous slides, they're not considered concrete or unchangeable. They provide the district, as General Manager Campbell said, with a baseline to work from and help us to establish short and long-term goals, and to help staff ensure that the district is left in a better position and a risk portfolio that is tolerable and actionable.
One of the main foundations of the actual analysis was keeping our levels of service at the same level. So no reduction in level of service to our customers.
Okay. So what do these funding recommendations look like without condition assessments? We can see the forecasted spending. The darker colors, the dark blue and the dark green, those are our current CIP or projected CIP spending all the way out to 2099. And the lighter colors are the recommended scenarios. On top of that, as mentioned earlier, they're stacking on top of what we're already spending. So you can see at the very beginning here, I know this kind of stands out, and you're kind of wondering what that is, and that is the spending that's going to be out there for the siphon that was just brought to board, or the engineering committee, I believe, the engineering committee.
The land outfall.
And over the years, it does increase quite a bit, but again, this is just risk analysis and funding scenarios, so to give us a baseline and know how we should move forward.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Or a suggestion. Can you go back to the previous slide? I think what would be helpful to see as well is an overlay of the do-nothing scenario, how much that's going to cost in the long run over time, if it's possible to break that out. Because, looking at this, I'm going to speak for myself, but there's This is a very large and increasing trajectory. But one of the features of this baseline assessment is the do-nothing scenario and the reactive scenario. And one of your messages that has come through in this presentation is if you do nothing, it's going to cost more. So being able to make that comparison here, I think would be really helpful. I'm not sure exactly what the ask is going to be tonight, but I would very much like to see that in order to be able to make an informed decision when I am presented with an ask.
I'm sure we could accommodate that.
Thank you.
Okay, so as we've mentioned many times here, the district wants to do more condition assessments and figure out how our systems are actually performing, where we're at, where we need to go. So these next couple of slides will show how analyzing our assets using a risk-based approach can provide savings over time versus replacing assets as they age or they fail. So this is a hypothetical scenario of our wastewater lines. It would, based on our current snapshots where we are with the age of our system, if we were not to inspect our wastewater systems, we could potentially have pipelines, many miles of pipelines in the high priority or critical zones. Whereas if we perform condition assessments, we can assess how they're performing, assess where they're at, lower their likelihood of failure scores based on how the conditions are, thickness of wall, and so forth. And that would lower our risk score and allow future funding, or allow those fundings to be spent on other projects that are critical. To show how performing condition assessments can benefit the district, we asked Black & Veatch to run a hypothetical funding scenario that incorporated condition assessments. The results depicted here show our spending profile for $15 million a year scenario without condition assessments and with condition assessments. And the gold here is the actual $15 million scenario that was recommended for the future funding after 2035. That is the funding strategy right there. And the blue is the hypothetical scenario. And as seen in previous slides, when condition assessments are performed and incorporated into the asset management program, it has potential to dramatically affect future funding needs. This is because condition assessments typically slow the rate of increases to an asset's likelihood of failure score. And through that action, we are extending the useful life of our assets, which frees up those funds and allows us to perform targeted rehabilitations or replacements instead of replacing entire assets. An example of this would be the district has identified a pipeline that is of critical condition, or they believe so. So we go out, we do a condition assessment, say we assess 3 miles. After that assessment, we realize that, well, hey, only 80% of this pipeline is in good condition still, but maybe only 20% needs to be replaced or rehabilitated. That spending of only replacing that 20% and extending the useful life of that remaining 80% would save the district funds compared to the full pipeline replacement.
And just to kind of support that 80-20 is not a made-up number. That's kind of an industry standard on linear assets, pipelines in the ground. They're saying close to 80% of the assets still has plenty of useful life left when people replace it. Usually spot repairs, about 20% is in critical or near critical condition. But until more recently with technology, especially for water pipelines, it was almost impossible to do condition assessment. But now with the new technology that's out, that even though it's fairly expensive to do, the savings outweigh the cost of doing that condition assessment. Or sorry, the potential savings.
And I'll say, to Director Pinnock's question for what are we doing, you look at the amount of sewer lines that we're doing CCT inspection and miles and miles a year. And then with that data, we're identifying where are those critical points, and that data is given to Ryan's group, and he's putting together these packages where they're doing their spot repair, their rehab. But if we're just looking at criticality, if we're just looking at age, we're ripping all that sewer line out and replacing it. But by doing this proactive approach of O&M going and cleaning and videoing these lines, we can identify, just those areas, that 20% that needs to be replaced or repaired.
And I know a lot of this presentation focus on the financial aspects of the different scenarios, but the do nothing method also has a real human aspect as far as level of service going down, customers out of service more often, besides just the fact that a spot or emergency repair is usually somewhere along the times of 1.5 to 2.5 times more expensive than a planned repair.
And the community outreach and all of that as well.
Okay, so as we can see on this slide, incorporating assessments could lead to much lower spending throughout the years of this scenario. Even with incorporating the spending on condition assessments, which was built into the analysis, which is represented by this red line, the district is still saving could save considerable amounts of money over the course of the study. And the condition assessment, the $15 million a year with condition assessment produces a $5.8 million average annual spend in 2025 dollars compared to the $6.4 million average annual spend in 2025 dollars of the no condition assessment scenario. And in the end, the potential savings by doing condition assessments and extending those useful lives is upwards of $265 million.
One of the things that staff is looking for is as we are striving or aspiring to do, is as we do condition assessments, start putting in a new line on top compared to this baseline, where we show the results of the condition assessment, and you'll see a new risk profile with a projection. So whether that's every 2 years or 5 years, whatever that likelihood scenario is where we get useful data, the board, through a dashboarding program or through presentation, would get a new profile of where our trajectory, and those blue lines that you see now, based on, which are just hypothetical estimates, will get populated with more realistic numbers based on actual condition assessment data. So you see some lines go up because we found a lot of assets that were critical, or those lines will go down because those assets were actually in good shape, but there would be real data driving those decisions. So I think, is that the last slide, or you got a couple more? Next steps.
Yep.
Can you explain the asterisk, please? 265 million asterisk.
Yeah, this is a hypothetical scenario, right? And that number was produced by using a very conservative estimate of when you perform a condition assessment. We were saying that you would still be spending 85% of the replacement cost. So in the scenario that I presented earlier of that water main break, you were saying if you were gonna repair that 20%, it would still cost 85% of the full replacement. And we wanted to take a conservative estimate because otherwise the numbers would kind of get astronomical and not be too realistic.
Yeah, we don't want to promise a $500, $600, $700, $800 million savings in a presentation of hypothetical.
Okay. So next steps.
This is the ask part.
Yeah.
We're done with the scary part? Please.
Yeah. Perfect timing.
We're asking for money, Wes is out.
I was just gonna ask him how we're gonna pay for this.
So in conclusion, we need to begin by expanding the volume of data collected in our CMMS systems and GIS systems. And this involves analyzing the existing data collection practices and identifying any gaps where information gathered. This data will be instrumental in enabling the district to forecast future needs accurately. And in addition to that, in addition to gathering more data, it's imperative that we conduct more condition assessments. As demonstrated earlier, consistently evaluating our assets could mitigate rapid increases to our likelihood of failure scores and extend the remaining useful life of our assets. And our staff excels at servicing our equipment and catering to our customers' needs. However, there's always room for improvement. Enhancing our capabilities is the best, or enhancing our capabilities is best achieved by documenting our goals, improving our data collection, and leveraging it to inform our decision-making process. We must also broaden the utilization of our CMMS systems and GIS systems as they serve as the foundational database that will facilitate all of our decision-making. Additionally, exploring new tools and new analytical tools like Power BI, as the general manager mentioned earlier, dashboarding system, that is essential for enhancing our data analysis in real time. And furthermore, it's imperative to broaden our asset management program and integrate it seamlessly into our decision-making framework. Having a clear understanding of the necessary actions and their timing will enable the district to uphold its commitment to delivering clean, safe, reliable, and affordable water and wastewater services to our customers.
So, to my point earlier about little things make big things happen, we are talking about small things, standardizing some of our process, refining our QA process through the data collection, garbage in, garbage out, right? So there's a lot of these little things that we need to do that over time are going to allow us to have better data, better decisions, right? So that's what we're talking about here, is utilizing that CMMS system, utilizing that GIS, really, because we're not doing a lot of the analysis, but like you said, having creative solutions using AI, using some of these models, predictive models, is kind of where we're going to go. It's going to take us time, but it all starts with that data collection and having really good processes in place, and this asset management plan helps us get there.
Think of this as a foundation document to build off of. And there's a lot of different asks that are going to come over the years. But the good news is we have some time. For the first 10 years plus, almost 15 years, we do not have major asset replacements that we need to worry about. We could take that time to start really beefing up and establishing our condition assessment program, getting the data, getting the systems in place to actually to utilize the data for decision making, then come back to the board with hopefully numbers that are less than $15 million a year for water and $15 million a year for sewer, and basically update those graphs, update those charts. The vision here is we fund condition assessment over the next 5 years. We come back to the board with an updated model, updated presentation to show the difference, hopefully, that condition assessment provides, and show the spending difference and the cost savings difference. And that's really kind of the ask. The other ask here today is more of a discussion. The board's appetite for this, the board's direction on where they feel that this asset management program is. Because at the end of the day, it's not only management's support, but board support consistently over many years before we get real results out of this condition assessment and asset management program.
Thank you for beating me to the punch.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, in closing, as General Manager just said, this presentation was aimed at providing information for everybody to think about and have input, because your input will help guide us to make better decisions and more strategic decisions moving forward. So with that, we will take any questions or comments that you may have.
Okay, thank you for putting all this work together. Thank you, Black and Veatch, for being here and presenting. What questions do my colleagues have? Yes, Director Grissett.
For Black and Veatch, who else have you done this for? What other water districts have done this same program?
Similar efforts. Well, there's a substantial number we've actually done it for. Most recently, under my tenure, we've been actually doing it for the State Water Project. DWR themselves, for managing all the water coming from the Delta. But we've done it recently as well for Coachella Valley Water District, Irvine Ranch Water District, just to name a few.
And then for the benefit of both myself, who didn't know much about this beforehand, and then the public as well, do you know offhand how much this project costed Vallecitos?
The current task order for this?
Correct.
It was roughly, I believe, 300,000.
Got it. And then the project length was how long? 2 years. So this has been a long time. Cool. Well, and then the presentation itself was generated by you guys?
It was definitely a work together.
Got it.
Been working with Eric for a couple months now to develop this presentation and the materials you saw today.
And then if we compare it to like Coachella water, is it basically the same presentation?
No, I'd say this was definitely ground up with Eric.
Ground up?
Yeah.
Great. Cool. Well, thank you. Those are all my questions. I appreciate the presentation here.
Go ahead.
Yeah, now that Wes is back, I was just wondering, have we given any attention to how we might pay for this?
Well, you may recall in the finance committee, so we have a number of CIP projects that are on the books now. So it's a ductile pipe condition assessment project that we've been working on, we're currently working on, and we're spending money on, and we're getting ready to actually put tools inside of pipes and assess the condition. We had done some acoustic testing, we had done some soil testing on corrosivity, and mapping that and coming up with a work plan. So those things are happening now. We have a project on the books for steel assessment that the board has already approved those budgets, and we're hoping they approve the next round of that coming up. But that's where that's where our budget efforts are being focused on, is those condition efforts. And then how can we expand that? And as you may recall, like with the land outfall project, such a big project, what did the board do last summer? Is we brought on a consultant to help program manage that project. So there may be opportunities in the future when we look at more replacement projects, we may have to be creative and look at those type of options. And we're just going to adjust and bob and weave as we move forward with Wes's considerations, of course.
Well, are we looking at some major debt financing or raising rates? I mean, how are we gonna pay for 15 million a year over 75 years?
Director Elthrop, so I think the plan right now, and hopefully from a staff perspective, is we'll just concentrate on condition assessment for over the next 5 years. We have about a 10 to 15-year window before that $15 million a year really hits. The goal is, by getting condition assessment data, that $15 million a year is based on tabletop condition, based on mainly age. Is that correct? Mainly age-based. So looking at actual condition assessment, the hope is we move that risk profile down from 5 or from red to green, and those assets have another 25, 35, 40 years of life, and we've only replaced 20, 30% of them, which is significantly less. From there, we'll basically update a new model, and without knowing the results, the ideal goal is that new model will show that our spend is no longer $15 million for water and $15 million for sewer. Our spend is $3-4 million in condition assessment and $5-6-7 million in replacement, based on renewal replacement, not full replacement.
Or well, think about financing 10 million then instead of 15.
Yeah.
Still a big number.
Still a big number.
Yeah.
But in the year 2035,
Yes.
money will be very different then.
Right.
What other questions?
Yeah, what are we spending now on condition assessment?
What was our budgets the last couple of years on condition assessment? Do you know?
Yeah, I think the approved budget for the current fiscal year was somewhere less than $1 million. We spent far less than that, just based on workload and other priorities that Eric took on, even though he was no longer in my department. So it's a number that we can get our hands around.
You say it's $1 million, but we're not spending that.
Correct.
What are we spending?
I'd say this fiscal year alone, we've probably spent in the order of about $200,000 with staff time with consultants. Now that's excluding, Black and Veatch effort, but physical condition assessment, putting together some work plans. It's been around, about $200,000.
And are you going to be asking us to approve some additional dollars for future years this evening, or this is just informational?
Correct. There is no financial ask as this part of this presentation.
All right,
no.
thank you.
Those asks are actually already in the draft budget. for condition assessment.
Okay.
It's not often we come and don't ask for money, so.
Yeah, there's something wrong.
So, my discussion is just that. I mean, I have a simplistic approach, so I apologize if it's too simple, but to kind of talk about what, the starting point, I mean, and I appreciate Black and Veatch, and we've had, you've started, the starting point to me seems off, because we've never not done anything, to use a triple negative. But you said if we do nothing, this is what happens. We've never done just nothing. So I think the starting point needs to be what we've done to this point, and then how has that changed? Like that's why he asked that question. Because you brought it up yourself. We've done a great job, I think. We've done condition assessments, we're repairing, I think we're doing a fairly good job. And again, this is just for discussion. So basically the ask is, we're doing a pretty good job, we just want to spend more money to do a better job. And yeah, that's always better, and there's always room for improvement. There might be, we might need to come somewhere in the middle, because I think we have. I think we've done a great job. And so I would like to see not the number, if we do nothing, this is what happens, as opposed to spending 15 million. I would like to see, this is what we're currently doing, not doing nothing, but this is what we're currently doing at 300K or 500K or 700K condition assessment, this is where it's been. And then this is the improvement we can do if we spend a little bit more, 15 million more, or 8 million more, whatever it is. So that's my simplistic approach. It just seems like I've been a customer for 25, 30 years in San Marcos. And I think Vallecitos is doing a great job already. And yes, there's room for improvement. Again, I'm repeating myself. And I know you said by small and simple things, great things are accomplished. That's one of my things, or you said it in a different way. But there is. Small and simple things can create great things. And you're already doing it. I am already truly impressed. And yes, I'm just concerned, like was brought up. That's a big number, 10 million, 15 million, for a little bit of improvement. I know down the road, 2097, that number gets wider, and we've got, a little 10-year gap, and so I've heard it all. I'm just concerned about the starting point by doing nothing, and the gap, that looks like a wide gap, and I'd like to see, with, like you said, with new technology and everything that's coming up, maybe we can spend a little bit more, and still get great results. And that's kind of my room for discussion, to spend a little bit and still get great results. And that's my discussion item. Yes.
So to Vice President Panic, so to kind of just reframe what you're saying is, one of the reasons we're in such good shape today is because of all the growth that happens. And when that growth happens on the water system, especially on the water system, when the rules for fire protections change and the fire flow requirements change, those older pipelines that were built when fire flow requirements were 500 gallons a minute have to be replaced with new ones that now are 1,500, didn't get replaced with new ones that allow 2,500 gallons a minute. So our water system, because of that, is fairly new. And it wasn't because we did condition assessment, because the condition assessment technology didn't exist. It's because we took advantage of the growth, not an advantage in a way that we were opportunistic. It's just with the change in the regulations on fire protection and the amount of storage that's needed for fire, those things just naturally occurred. If you look at our sewer CIP, we're spending majority of our CIP monies on sewer, and our sewer funds are the ones that are getting really hit, because those legacy sewer systems, they're not affected by that. They're just affected by pure growth and age. So we've done a great job, our ops guys do a great job maintaining our vertical facilities, our pump stations, our pressure reducing stations, our tanks. You guys see tank rehabs all the time. That's not going to change much with condition assessment, because those are assessed daily, weekly, monthly anyway. So you're absolutely right about that. The technology is now available, and our growth window is not done. We got 10, 15 years of significant growth window. But after that, there's no more growth window of significance to drive that. So what happened in the past is not going to be a formula for the future, because we're not going to have a repeat. San Marcos is not going to add another 100,000 residents between 2050 and 2099, for example. It's just, I don't know what the future really is. As Director Grosset said, we can't really predict that far ahead, but that's why the model gets adjusted. And that's why we have the first 5 to 10 years to do analysis and adjust. Do analysis, as Jason said, bob and weave, because we don't know the future. All we know is The do-nothing method is the more realistic method without a plan. Not from now to 2035, 2040, but thereafter. Because that natural trigger of replacing those assets isn't going to be there.
And I will say, this is, in front of the full board, the first real presentation. We've been working on it for a number of years. We've been working since 2017 on small things. So this is really just get it in your head, start thinking about it. It's no ask. It's, this will weave into other discussions at Finance Committee and Engineering and Equipment. And so it's a baseline. It's a backdrop to the situation we're facing and going to face in the future. So we're trying to add this now to the conversation.
Well, you succeeded. It's in our head. It's in my head, I guess. So.
Hopefully it's not giving you nightmares. So.
Now we got to have to take some sleeping pills now.
Well, if the one thing I want the board to leave with is we have about 10 plus years to do something proactively to move the needle. And I think we should take advantage of that.
To use Jason's word, a little bit, so we can spend a little bit of money
Yeah,
to
just a little
get
bit.
great things. Not the other way around, spend a lot of money to get a little thing. So I'm just trying to use his, wording on that.
We are focused on the little things. And it's capacity, it's budget, all these things are real. These limitations, these constraints, these are real. We recognize that, staff recognizes that.
I got it. No, thank you.
So I appreciate conditioned assessment. I think that makes a lot of sense. There's no reason from an economic and an environmental perspective that we need to be replacing entire pipes if there's only one portion that's damaged. It also, that makes sense for the district. What I would like to see, and I know General Manager keeps saying that we have time, I'm not exactly aligned with you on this, and we've not spoken about this, so I just had the thought now. What I would like to see, you mentioned that you have done this for other agencies. There should be a way, rather than a serial rollout application of this, where we do the analysis and the assessment, and then we look at the data. There should be a way to parallel track, at least in the beginning. So we collect a couple of years of data, and then we start doing the analysis and compare it to other districts that have been done so that we can have an expectation of what we should be expecting as far as money saved or life extensions. And then we can make a decision so that we can make a decision earlier rather than waiting the 10 years, going down this path. And what if this path doesn't work? Then we've spent 10 years going down this path and spent a lot of money, and we don't have another option. So I would just encourage you to think about, rather than a serial application completely of this, that we have other things that we can look at as far as comparisons in our planning of this. So collect a couple of years worth of data, then we look at how we are doing relative to other groups that have been the early adopters. Then we can have another data point, and we might be able to make a decision that's more informed rather than waiting the 10 years. I would hate for us to be waiting 10 years, going down this pathway for it and spending all of this money. And you've heard the hesitation amongst us to find out that it doesn't work, but we've already invested, so maybe now we feel obligated to. I don't want us to be in that position.
I think that's an excellent point. A 2 to 5 year window seems much more reasonable. Starting to report out 2 years and make a decision prior to the 5 year window. It seems that it's reasonable for us to actually get real data and actually be able to analyze it.
One more question. So when I imagine asset management plan, I imagine there's some robust database that you can just pull up any second, like the pipe in our bathroom, for instance. How old is that, So my question, does this exist, or do you just ask Ed how old something is?
That does exist. We do have a pretty extensive asset registry in Maximo and in our GIS systems. So if we were to pull up our GIS systems right now, if you pulled up the, like you clicked on a pipeline, you would see all of its characteristics. You would see size, age, the amount of turns a valve would have, when it was installed, when it was modified, all of those kind of things. And all of that.
Is useful life part of that too? So you would see like, it's on year 9 and like.
Not yet.
No.
Not yet, but well, I'll jump ahead here. So that's actually something that we have been looking at implementing into our GIS characteristics, because implementing just a condition-based score when they go out there to exercise a gate valve, right? You know, they go up, they can pull up their app, and they can hit, oh, this valve was in great condition, it was a 5, it was a 1, right? You know, oh, this valve was in bad condition, it's a 5. And over time, you know, we're exercising those valves every 2 years. We're getting there. We're collecting data over and over and over, and we can see how that's going to start to deteriorate over time, and that could help us make decisions for replacing large swath of gate valves in a certain area.
Totally, and, you know, to have that, whatever, it was built in 92, useful life is 30 years coming up on it, and just a little reminder there, plus maybe even a risk score associated with it from this nice charting that you guys have now would be super useful. So adding a few more columns would be a good idea for this.
Director Grissett, you're not wrong. If we can't find it in GIS, then we ask Ed.
Yeah, that is a fact.
The backup redundant system.
Yes.
Yeah, and we are, one of our next steps is to move into, as Eric said, looking at creating those dashboards and how we can pull up that data. But to the president's question, point about, you know, how quickly those data changes aren't happening very often. Like Eric said, they're turning that valve every 2 years, so that the change in that data isn't every week, every month. You know what I mean? So some of those changes aren't as instantaneous or just close in interval that's going to change things, just based on staff, based on the size of our number of assets and the size of our district. But I think with those dashboards, we're going to be able to have that data more readily available, be able to look at it and scrutinize it and make decisions.
Any other discussion points? Okay. Thank you, gentlemen. This is a very thorough presentation. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Appreciate it, thank you.
Okay, we're moving on to action item 2.2.
Yes.
Sewer rehabilitation contract award for the 16-inch emergency bypass and 12-inch fail-safe pipeline project.
Yes, thank you, Madam President. As the board may recall from the last meeting, we had a similar item in which we had a sewer rehabilitation, and the existing methodology with the contractor wasn't going to work. So we had to adjust and find another methodology that would work without the actually open trenching and digging up the sewer. At the last one, I think the board got a fairly high number from the contractor, and this was a much more palatable number, and it was pretty much even. This project is going to be more expensive than the credit. However, it's also in an environmentally sensitive area, so the open trench option was not a viable option. So with that, let me hand it over to Capital Facilities Engineer, Senior Engineer Ryan Morgan.
Thank you, General Manager Gumpel. Good evening, directors. Very excited to bring this sewer rehab contract award for the 16-inch emergency bypass and 12-inch fail-safe pipeline project before you tonight. The district's emergency bypass outfall was originally installed in 1969. It diverts wastewater being conveyed to Meadowlark Water Reclamation Facility to the land outfall during peak wet weather events or other operational emergencies. The emergency bypass is considered a critical infrastructure asset, which experienced 3 breaks between 2017 and 2019. That resulted in emergency response and repair. The increased risk with operating the emergency bypass led to the temporary decommissioning of the pipeline in 2019. The board is familiar with this project, taking action during the past project milestones. Since 2021, those are listed on page 113 of your board packet. This included construction agreement award to Burtech Pipeline in September of 2022. The majority of the proposed improvements were installed by the end of 2023. The work remaining consists of trenchless rehabilitation of approximately 1,000 feet of a pressurized segment of the emergency bypass at the location highlighted in yellow on the figure. Although Burtech's contract included this segment upon cleaning and inspection in November, Burtech informed the district they observed a change condition that would impact the agreement, and they would not honor a pressure test and warranty for the pressure liner in this segment, contrary to the terms of the contract. These conditions are unsatisfactory to the district's risk tolerance, and after significant coordination with Burtech, both parties agreed to remove this work from the contract, resulting in a deductive change order or credit
of approximately $291,000. Staff, in search of a solution, worked with their construction manager to solicit a qualified pressure liner manufacturer and certified local installer to determine if the pipeline could in fact be rehabilitated using CIPP pressure liner to meet the original project intent. In situ form technologies, or just in situ form, having past success working with the district, evaluated the condition of the existing pipeline and determined the work can be successfully completed per the contract requirements, including a pressure test and warranty. In situ form provided a proposal to install, test, and inspect the new CIPP liner by manufacturer certified installers in the amount of $670,949, which is offset by the approximate deductive change order credit from Burtech of $291,000. The delay involved in coordinating this portion of the contract work will require amending an existing task order with Recon Environmental to provide an extension of existing biological monitoring field services in the time and materials not to exceed amount of $36,399. Staff and Valley CM reviewed and determined in situ form's bid and Recon's proposal to be responsive, accurate, and consistent with market pricing. Due to operational criticality and schedule constraints of the project, staff proposes to contract directly with in situ form for this work. The fiscal impact is shown on page 114 of the board packet. With the proposed rehab work and deductive change order credits, staff has estimated a budget deficit of roughly $250,000. However, this is only an estimate at this time, and there are ongoing conditions with Burtech which may change this amount, including the potential for a liquidated damages credit for exceeding the time of completion on the contract. Upon completion of all construction activities and negotiations, staff will bring this item back for project final acceptance with an actual fiscal impact report for the board. Staff anticipates this project acceptance will come before the board in June, and it's with this, staff recommends first, authorizing the general manager to execute a contract agreement with In Situ Form Technologies in the amount of $670,949, subject to the provisions of the contract, and second, authorizing the general manager to execute a task order amendment with Recon Environmental in the amount of $36,399, and I can take any questions at this time.
And to Director Grosset's earlier request, this asset has a risk score of 25. At the completion, it will have a risk score of 10.
Thank you. Do we have any public speakers for this agenda item? Okay, what questions do my colleagues have?
I have a question. Ryan, was the in situ form process the only viable solution, trenchless solution? Or was there any?
But there's really only two manufacturers of this pressure liner, which really narrowed down our selection process. Ironically enough, one installer is unable to comply, and the other is. In this case, the liner itself is essentially the same product, but we have one vendor who's willing to honor the pressure test and warranty stipulation, and one that's not. And that's really what's driven this.
I'll also say that this is a very narrow easement corridor, so there's not a lot of room. Like the gentleman said, it's an environmentally sensitive area. This particular portion of the line is also pressurized. So to try to remove and replace it like a traditional, dig and lay process would be extremely expensive. We would have to do it at night. We'd have to do it in phases. Again, it would set us back because of the environmental component of mitigation and everything. So trenchless was really the best option.
And in situ form was the only other?
Yes, In Situ Form was the only other manufacturer vendor who could provide the pressure main CIPP liner.
Okay, thanks.
Do both of them need to be fixed up, or just one of them? 16 and 12, right? There's two of them.
Just the 16-inch. This is only for the emergency bypass. The fail-safe is actually completed.
Yep.
And we're done with that portion of the work.
And how long is it?
It's only about 1,000 feet between Korea Way and the connection at just off Melrose Drive there in that yellow rectangle. It's about 1,000 feet.
$600,000 for 1,000 feet of 16-inch liner? Is that it?
Yes, and we could expect probably at least double or triple that value if it was a traditional replacement.
Part of their price includes not just the lining, but the potential to add access points. So we're hoping that they don't have to do that. That's an option, and we're adding that to the contract. So if it happens, then we've got the money to pull that lever. But if they don't have to dig and put these access points in, I think we save, or this price goes down an additional $200,000-300,000, right?
Yeah, up to 200,000, that's a good point, is on the table. If during the time of construction it's determined that those access pits are not required, the cost will go down approximately $200,000.
And the first guy looks at it and he goes, this looks sketch, I don't want to do it. And then the second guy goes, I'll do it. Is that what it is?
Upon review of the inspection video, the CCTV inspection video that they take from inside the pipe, that was not able to be provided until we were in construction. It was at that time that they noted there's a change of condition because we didn't have this video during bid. However, the or equal vendor is able to accommodate through partly opening up these pits we're talking about to mitigate some of the problems inside the hose pipe, that they're able to not only do the work, but able to pressure test and warranty it.
I see, so they're being creative, but.
And the contract, at the time that the contractor said they couldn't do the work, it was a long, lengthy back and forth between the district in the order of 4 or 5 months. I think that this has been going on, that we've been working on multiple different ways to make this work on their end, on our end. Where can we compromise? Where can we accept potentially a lesser product? Is it worth it, that cost? And ultimately coming to this decision that this isn't going to work. We're not going to work this out through the traditional sense.
Okay, all my questions, thank you.
Thank you.
And I like Director Gross said, I always scratch my head, 600K for 1,000 feet, but just a question, maybe just generally, because it seems there's a theme with anything, whether it's Vallecitos or Encino or anybody in North County, anybody, the suppliers, there's a lack of suppliers, a lack of contractors. Is there an explanation for that? I mean, nobody wants to work with, I'm not taking it personally, nobody wants to work with Vallecitos, or is it just, is this post-COVID, is this the way it's always been in the industry, that there's so few suppliers? Because competition, I know, could drive down cost, and it just seems like with one supplier, he can give us any price he wants, and we say, well, you're the only guy, I guess we're gonna have to take you. Is that been a common theme for years?
That's a valid question and concern. For this specific problem we face, it's an uncommon product. It's a pressure liner, CIPP. Most gravity sewer applications are not pressure rated. So those contractors and those materials are very well sourced. Many competing contractors in the market for that. The pressure liner, part of the reason why it's expensive is it's a very niche kind of market. It's very this section of the liner is the only portion that's the pressure liner. The rest of it is under gravity conditions. So it was really only in this segment that we face that problem.
Interesting.
And one of the reasons why it's so critical that we get the warranty and everything with it, we want insurance, because that pipe, it's the fail-safe pipe that we're doing, is that correct?
Emergency bypass.
Oh, sorry, emergency bypass pipe thing, thank you. That pipe connects to our outfall, and that outfall is pressurized, and if that outfall breaks, there's no stopping it. There's no bypass around that outfall, and it's connected, so we need to make sure we get this one right from a risk standpoint, so.
So that I understand it's special, it just seems like there should be more than one guy in Southern California doing it.
Yeah, structural liners are very specialty. In fact, I don't think we have a pressure liner in our system in this type of application. We have some in our force mains and some of our older force mains, but it's not something that we commonly see, commonly use. It is, it's a supply and demand, and it's very specialty.
It explains it, it's just,
Yeah.
darn. Thanks.
I'm going to raise another point. I understand that this work needs to be done. I am struggling with us paying for an additional assessment when the delay was caused by a vendor who took on the job to begin with, saying that they could do it. These are listed as a motion to adopt two things. I would like to break these motions up, and I would like to have conversations with our legal counsel about what conversations have happened to try to recover some of this cost. Because you're asking us for $36,000 for the environmental assessment that seems like it needs to be done, but it wouldn't have had to be done if 4 to 5 months hadn't been spent going back and forth because the vendor said they could do the work and then they said they couldn't do the work. And I'm not comfortable approving everything because I know it's harder to recover money once you've given it out. I know this work needs to be done. So I would like to break up these motions. I'm not exactly sure how to do that. But I would like to break up these motions. Maybe I need a motion for that. I don't know.
Well, President, let me try to address your question. If you still want to break up those motions, you absolutely can. So the consultant that's working is our consultant, correct, for environmental?
Yeah, that's
Okay,
correct.
it's our consultant, and the delay is real. As Capital Facility Senior Engineer Ryan Morgan mentioned, that we're looking at liquidated damages for overruns. Those liquidated damage for overruns, the way they work is you have to have real costs associated, and those extra fees are real costs. So that's all going to be part of the negotiation. When we come back to the board, anything that's happened in negotiations to reduce the cost overruns will be reported at that point, and then there's still opportunity for the board to take further actions if not satisfied before we accept that project.
Yeah, the negotiations are ongoing and will continue through this process as we move forward. So there is a lot of room for negotiation with this contractor who we have under contract, and these are conversations that we've had and will continue to have. And the goal is to try to get net zero, right? That we don't have an ad and we can balance this project budget and still get the product we want. That's what we're looking for.
And Ryan and his team do these type of negotiations all the time in these scenarios. Usually the board's not aware of it because it's done prior to coming to the board, but due to the nature of this one, getting another contractor on board to do this portion of work, there's a timing element.
Oh, I know. I understand. I know that you're working hard to get this done. Does this board action approving both of these motions combined into one facilitate that for
Yeah.
you? Does it make it easier for you?
Yeah.
Yes. And just to clarify, the environmental services is our field biological monitoring out in the field. It's not a study. The studies have been completed and accepted. These are services that are time and materials not to exceed. So ideally, if things go well and smoothly and we get in and we get out, we won't utilize that full amount of the environmental services either.
Yeah, we always go into these things conservatively, right? Because it is T&M, and with the goal of trying to reduce those costs and speed things up, and even that 600,000, right? If our goal is to hopefully that they can do the work without having to open up those access pits, and that price comes down. So these are all things that we're working for, but we need those sort of included in. So in the moment, we can make those decisions, we can move forward, and we don't have to come back and we have additional delays. Basically we have to stop work. Oh no, I can't authorize that. I have to stop work. I have to come back to the board. And that's traditionally how we've been able to move projects forward.
Okay, are there any other discussion points?
Couple more. So you can dig access pits, but you can't dig a trench for 1,000 feet?
Smaller footprint.
Crazy. Impact on neighbors? What will happen? Like, when you put the thing in the liner, like, what are they gonna hear? When's it gonna happen? How long's it gonna happen for?
Under the best circumstances, we will be out there for 2 to 4 weeks, depending on how much excavating is needed. There's very minimal impact to the neighborhood. They will hear some noise during the steam cure process. But besides that, there's not heavy equipment, there's not trenching. One thing about this corridor specifically, it's an environmentally sensitive habitat on a very steep embankment. So to trench it is not very constructible, and you would spend a premium, especially in construction. We'd most likely have to re-advertise bids. We'd have to go back out to bid. We'd have to basically make this into its own CIP project to get competitive bids on it, and kind of close the door on this project and move forward with that. But again, that would involve a timing element to do
Got it.
that.
And then are the neighbors going to be made aware of this at all?
You can see it's in a canyon. It's kind of behind the neighbors. I think it's along a walking trail.
Yep.
Yeah,
That's probably the biggest impact to the community.
The neighborhood's actually already well aware of the project because it's currently ongoing.
Yep.
So, but we could definitely allow the neighbors to know there'll be a couple weeks. Now, the trenchless methodology has a lot less impact than open trench from a noise, from an interference, obviously from an environmental standpoint. But we could absolutely let the neighbors know that we'll be out here from this period to this period, and there'll be extra noise during the curing process once we have a schedule.
Sure, that'd be a great idea. And why did this area break and not area, below it? Like, what's special about this area, do you think?
Yeah, so like Ryan said, it's 1969 is installed, and it's a
Really?
it's a
Been there for a long
techite
time.
pipe, which is what we call in the wastewater industry horrible. It's literally the worst thing you could ever put in the
Good
ground.
adjective for it, yeah.
And because it's pressurized, it's even greater. Why would they ever do this?
I see.
But at that time, that was the product that was being marketed, and everybody was putting it in. And so it's this area that's under pressure, and it's in a cyclical pressure, right? So it's continually changing. So it's just a lot of stress. It's an old product that's not good, and that's why we need to. And that's why it's failing in this particular area.
Got it. And so it's not possible that the development of Korea impacted it somehow?
No,
Okay.
I wish.
Okay, that's all my questions. Thank you for the presentation and answers.
Yeah, I just had one question on, what caused Burtech not to agree to warranty? Was it the condition was worse than they had assumed to start with?
There's some internal diameter changes in the material where we have performed past repairs at our break locations. Those changes in diameter, if you can imagine the liner inside the hose pipe adjusting from a narrower diameter to a wider diameter, according to Burtech's subconsultant, it's violating the tolerance of what the liner can do to maintain pressure integrity. Part of what we worked on was mitigating those factors, but it was as Jason mentioned, it was very a long drawn out coordination process. We've been doing it since November, several meetings, and really leading us to solicit in situ form who was able to be much more accommodating, frankly.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Okay, may I have a motion to approve action 2.2 as presented by staff?
I'll move staff's recommendation.
Okay, moved by Director Elithar. May I have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, seconded by Director Garcette. Any further discussion? Okay, please vote. Okay, motion passes. Thank you, gentlemen, for your presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, action item 2.3, General Manager's Authority for Hiring Salary.
Yes, thank you, Madam President. So this item was brought to the P3 a little while ago to talk about the hiring range. So currently, the district only hires for new employees salaries A, B, or C. Each alphabet step is 5%, A being the lowest, and our normal salary schedule goes up to G. One of the things the P3 said in support of the item was, please do a survey before you bring it to the board so we can see how we compare to our neighboring agencies. What authority does the general manager have compared to neighboring agencies as far as hiring range? With that, I will hand this over to my Human Resource and Risk Manager, Denise Aviles.
Thank you, General Manager Gumpel. Good evening. Tonight I am presenting the board item regarding the General Manager's authority for new hires starting salary. The current policy allows the General Manager to authorize hiring up to step C within a designated salary range. The hiring market has required the board to approve salaries higher than the general manager's approving authority, resulting in an increase in delays to the hiring process and potentially losing good customer candidates. This item was brought to the Public Awareness, Personnel, and Policy Committee on February 5th of 2024. Staff presented the item with a recommendation to allow the general manager to have the hiring authority up to step G. The committee was open to discussion and suggested to staff to conduct a survey of local agencies and to bring back to the full board. So with that, we did, we'll pull it up. So Human Resources conducted a survey from other local water, wastewater agencies regarding their hiring authority practices. Of the agencies that responded, the general manager has full and final authority to hire within the approved salary schedule. The increased flexibility improves operational efficiency by reducing time, which will in turn expedite the recruitment process. The fiscal impact. The fiscal impact could potentially have a financial impact of up to 20% higher than the step C. So staff recommendation, staff recommends the board approve increasing the general manager's signing authority for hiring up to step G on the salary schedule, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. We have any public speakers for this agenda item?
No, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. What questions do my colleagues have? No questions. Okay, yes.
I guess this really is just to expedite the hiring process. If we do have a potential employee that is looking to get higher than C, then rather than bring that particular employee back to the board for approval to you to hire, you would just have that authority already in place.
Absolutely, Director Hernandez. The other portion is a lot of times because we're known and it's advertised our hiring range because our hiring range is limited. And when we have job openings, if we know good people in the industry, we'll call them up and say, hey, could you consider coming over? In more than one occasion, a lot of times they say no because of the hiring range. We even tell them that we could bring you to the board, but some people are afraid of having that bullseye coming to the board, and then everybody on staff knows exactly the process they went through, and they're uncomfortable with that extra pressure on them. So we've actually had good candidates not apply for positions because of that reason. Not many. Well, a lot of times we can still talk them into it, but I know of at least 2 that have not.
Thank you for that context. And just so I'm understanding it correctly, looking at this chart, it looks like Vallecitos is the only water district, wastewater district that places limitations on the general manager's authority to hire. And what the ask is tonight is essentially to remove any barriers. Not, I know you said up to step G, but step G is the highest level. So in actuality, we're removing any barriers to hire.
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that for myself and for the public. Any other questions, discussion points?
I do have one more. I guess before I was on the board, there was a approval for a signing bonus. I think it was like 10,000, something like that. It seemed like it happened maybe around shortly after COVID time when it was highly competitive. Is that still enacted? Do you know?
No, anything like that would have to come to the board.
It was
for
it was on the board.
Yeah.
It was a board approval, I believe, from 21 or something like that. I saw.
Yes.
So is it still active? Do you know?
No, there's no policy. I'm sorry, maybe I'm misunderstanding the question. Director Gross said there's no policy for that. If something were like something like that
I
would
see. So
happen,
on individual cases. it would be-
yeah, it needs full board requirement, and this does not change that.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Any further questions or discussion? Okay, may I have a motion to approve item 2.3 as presented by staff?
Move to approve.
Thank you. Motion by Director Hernandez. May I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Vice President Pinnock. Any other discussion? Nope. Okay. Please indicate your approval or not. Okay. Fantastic. It passes. Thank you. Thank you, Denise, for your presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to action item 2.4. This is very lengthy. I'm going to read the whole thing. Resolution declaring pursuant to Government Code Section 54221 that certain real property located near the district headquarters, parenthesis, a portion of APN 220-220-06, end parenthesis, is non-exempt surplus land, approving the notice of availability therefore, authorizing the general manager to comply with the Surplus Land Act, and finding that such declaration is exempt from environmental review under the California Environmental Quality Act pursuant to sections 15060C and 153112, of the CEQA guidelines.
Well, first off, I'm glad you had to read that and not me. But as the board may recall, this is for what we call the hilltop property. The ad hoc committee met to discuss and get an update on it. One of the action items or requests, that came out of the ad hoc committee was to bring the surplus property process forward to the full board. With that, I'll hand this over to our legal counsel, Nick Norvell.
Thank you, General Manager. So, as the board may be aware, in January 2020, a new law took effect that's supplemented and expanded the Surplus Land Act. That's been a long-standing law in California that required public agencies, before they can sell or lease property, to offer it to certain entities before they can put it publicly available on the market. The law used to be restricted to certain entities like school districts or parks entities, some housing entities. But with the increased focus on housing production in California, the legislature expanded the law to make sure that local agencies are offering surplus property to affordable housing entities prior to placing them on the market, in addition to those other agencies and entities that I mentioned, for essentially them to have the first crack at purchasing the property for housing purposes. And the other thing that the expanded Surplus Land Act did was provide more teeth when agencies don't follow the Surplus Land Act. So for example, if an agency were to sell property without following it, it could be penalized up to 30% of the value of the purchase or lease of the land, and as much as 50% if there are repeat violations. So what the board is being asked to do here is to essentially start that process of making the hillside property available to the entities that are required to receive notices of availability under the Surplus Land Act. What would happen is that after those notices go out to the required entities, they have a certain period of time to respond back to the district, express their interest in either purchasing or leasing the land, and then depending on what types of responses the district gets, you have to have an exclusive negotiating period with those entities, have good faith negotiations with them over that period for them to potentially purchase or lease the property before you can go out to the full market. One of the things I want to emphasize is that even though this process is required, it does not require the district to accept less than fair market value or what the district considers fair market value for the property. So you might reach a point in those negotiations at the end where the district is dissatisfied that it is achieving fair market value and those negotiations are unsuccessful, and then you can go out to the market. But like I said, the goal here is for these agencies and entities to have the first crack at potentially purchasing or leasing the property from the district. And let's see. So the attached resolution that is proposed for the board would declare that the property is surplus land under the Surplus Land Act and direct staff to take steps to comply with the act and then respond based on any offers or interest received.
Thank you for that background. And just for the benefit of myself and the public, this does not compel us to sell the property.
Correct.
And the action item also says exempt from environmental review under CEQA. Can you talk a little bit about that, please?
Yes. Given that this is just a preliminary action of making the property potentially available for purchase or lease, it's not actually approving any potential project that anyone would want to build or have in mind for that property. Whatever is being proposed by a potential purchaser or developer, whoever might end up buying that property, would have to go through the environmental review process based on the specific project that they have in mind at that time. And that would be coordinated through with the land use agency in conjunction with the district. So that process would come later. This action now by itself does not require environmental review.
And also to be clear, we are not skirting our, or shirking our environmental responsibilities with this resolution.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. What questions?
Just two quick questions. So, you mentioned a couple things, but making that available to these certain entities, could they come in and offer a portion of the, could we offer a portion of the land, not the entirety of it?
Potentially, but it would depend on what you later intended to do
Right.
with the property.
But
So for example,
you could divide the,
you couldn't tell them, we're making this land we're making only a portion of the land available to you, and then
Right.
go and sell a different portion outside of this process, for example, or lease it to a different buyer. So,
would their offer have to include the entirety though?
no, not necessarily.
Okay, so they could say, hey, well, are you guys willing to offer us 10 acres instead of 33 or whatever?
Yes, and it might leave the balance of the land available for you to sell or to lease on the open market at the end of that process, having negotiated the sale or lease with that entity for just a portion of it.
Okay, so for lack of a better term, we could subdivide kind of if somebody wants to buy a portion.
If that is what the person is interested in.
Right.
One of the aspects of good faith negotiations that the district would be required to have with, if an agency or entity is interested in purchasing it, is that the district cannot place such significant requirements on what they propose that it would prevent housing production. So for example, you couldn't develop unreasonable conditions that would minimize the ability to build housing on the property.
Gotcha, okay. And what, you mentioned that there's a time period that goes out. What is that time period that?
The notices of availability,
Right.
it would give them 60 days to respond.
Oh.
If one of them responds, you have to enter into good faith negotiations with them for a period of 90 days.
Oh,
At the end of that 90-day period, as I mentioned, there's new teeth in the law. One of those teeth is that the district has an affirmative obligation to notify the state Department of Housing and Community Development that it's gone through this process. We've tried negotiating with someone. This is the result. HCD, Housing and Community Development, has 30 days to tell you whether they think the district violated the law or not. At the end of that 30-day period, you're either free to proceed or you've received notice from the state that you need to go back and correct some aspect of the process.
So 60 days to respond, 90 days of negotiation.
Correct.
And another 30 days of.
Additional.
Of waiting.
You can start adding it up.
Yeah, that's right, but it's shorter than I thought, so that's, okay. Thanks.
So, this happened before my time here too, but why was the hillside selected as like a property that's interesting out of all the property that we have? Like, as an example, like where the solar panels are, that seems like a very desirable place. Solar panels don't need to be affixed to the ground, they could be put on top of a roof of a high-rise that was there, as an example. So what's the special thing about Hillside in particular?
The district went through a process of evaluating all the facilities, all the properties that were basically vacant or available. And because of the transportation corridor, the location next to the actually light rail, schools location, including Palomar College, and also centrally located within the actual community, with some walkable distance, a decent walking score, that this property kind of rose to the top as a potential for future revenues for the district to offset potential rate increases, and develop it and monetize the site essentially.
Got it. And I guess that's an important thing to reiterate to the public. The end goal here is to raise revenue in alternative means to offset rate increases.
Yeah, absolutely.
Got it. Thank you.
And it is 33, or what is the acres, you know?
I believe it's right around 33 acres, but I don't recall exactly.
Any other questions? Okay. May I have a motion to approve action item 2.4 as presented?
Move to approve.
Okay, motion by Director Hernandez. May I have a second?
Second?
Okay, seconded by Vice President Pinnock. Please vote. Okay, motion passes. Thank you. Thank you for your report. Thank you for being here, Nick. Sorry, legal counsel. Sorry. Okay, moving on to reports. General Manager Gumpel.
Yeah, just a few items, but they're all very exciting items. So I'll go in chronological order. So we have the Helopod event on 4/30, so April 30th at 10 a.m. We asked that the board members interested in coming meet at the district around 9:30, and we'll carpool you up. We're doing finalizations of the actual scheduling and to hopefully get the helicopter there. To actually take water out of the facility. Ed and his team have been testing the facility, making sure it's all ready. And we are also working on the final agenda, which we will get out as a draft to President Boyd Hodgson for review. Basically, we're providing you with the bullet points of what the subjects everybody's going to cover. So this way we know the subject material. Next item is on May 1st, which is our board meeting. We're going to have our finalists in a presentation for our elementary school calendar event. I believe we have one from three, obviously first, second, third place from 3 different schools and 1 special mention. So coming. The seed library will be on May 14th. And that's an event for the new seed library, and it'll be 10 a.m. here at the district offices. And on May 15th, which is also a board meeting, we'll have the presentation from La Costa Meadows Elementary School, where I believe Mrs. Prum will be here with her class to do that presentation. So those are the events that are coming up.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. District Legal Counsel.
Thank you, Madam President. So with this being an election year, I wanted to provide a brief reminder that the legislature expanded part of the state's political reform laws last year. It's called the Levine Act, and the changes took effect at the beginning of last year. So under the Levine Act, as you may remember, if you recall hearing about this before, district officials are prohibited from accepting, soliciting, or directing a campaign contribution of $250 or more if the donor is involved in a contract, license, permit, or other entitlement that's pending before the district. The prohibition also continues for 12 months after the proceeding here at the district. In addition, district officials are required to disclose and recuse themselves if they've received a contribution of $250 or more from someone involved in a contract, license, or entitlement that came before the district within the previous 12 months. So the law relates both to the parties that are directly involved, like the counterparty, to a contract or some other action that's coming here before the board, as well as to other participants who might actively support or oppose a particular decision. For example, if they've hired a lobbyist that is coming here before the district. This is something that's extremely rare, I think, in the water district context. It's probably a lot more common and cumbersome for example, for city elected officials, but it is important to remember and to be aware of that it does apply to the district as well. I do want to note that the rule does not apply to labor contracts, to personal employment contracts, or to competitively bid contracts that might come before the board. And I'm happy to provide more information to the board if you have any follow-up questions or would like some resources from the Fair Political Practices Commission or our office. And then in addition, if any of you will be attending the Aqua Conference in May, our office will be providing a presentation at the conference on the Levine Act and other ethics laws that might be of interest to the district.
Great, thank you. San Diego County Water Authority.
Now, the Water Authority will hold their regular April board meeting next week on the 25th.
Okay, great, thank you. Encino Wastewater.
Yes, we had our capital committee meeting this morning. The big discussion was our budget. Lots of information, not much of a surprise, but just the amount of increase led a couple of the board members to question, how we got here and what we can do in the future. And I suggested, much like we do here at Vallecitos, that they put together a subcommittee to join the staff in creating the budget, because we don't see it until it's delivered to us, and we don't have any discussion in the middle, and so we're really kind of blindsided. So I think next year, They're gonna put together a subcommittee so we can see exactly how that sausage is made, so that we can then pick it apart if we want to and look at it and determine we don't need this capital improvement project, we can defer it down the line. Taken in good stride by the manager, and so I think that was the takeaway for today's meeting.
Okay, great, thank you. Standing committees.
Yes, I have two. Finance Investment Committee met on Tuesday, April 9th. The items for discussion were the operating budget, including preliminary salaries and benefits, and the capital budget, and the board will get its first review of this on the May 1st board meeting. Also, we held a Engineering Equipment Committee meeting on Thursday, April 11th. Items for discussion were district headquarters ADA bathroom update discussion, and second, land outfall sewer parallel section 8 project update. That's my report.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, we met for the P3 committee, and we had a wonderful meeting talking about a variety of subjects that were actually covered tonight. The seed library, the heliopod.
Hello.
And excitement around those two things. The internship programs that we have going on, the scholarship program, which we will be reviewing here shortly and bringing to the board for approval soon. The update on the climate progress report, which is coming along phenomenally well. I wish Chris was here to give him some kudos for that. But as well as the staffing stuff, so thank you, Denise, for coming through as well. And the Special District Leadership Awards, which we continue to pursue excellence for Vallecitos here. So that was it. Great meeting.
Great, thank you. Thank you for covering all of that as well. I will provide just a quick update moving into director's reports and meetings, conferences, seminars attended. So I had the pleasure of attending the La Mirada presentation from Bill Dean's water management program. Instead of presenting at the board, which has been the case for schools in the past, they presented at the school. And they provided their data results, and they did make some asks of us that I believe we are going to be working on in the form of rain barrels. So we are going to do our best to provide them with those asks. And it was a really nice presentation, being in the school, in the environment. I think even though we were in the home environment, some of the children were a little bit nervous, but that's okay. They did a great job, and there was a lot of parents that attended as well. I also had the privilege of being a VIP taster, as well as our former general manager, Glenn Pruitt. I saw him at San Marcos Elementary. We were both VIP taste testers for water, as also part of Bill Dean's program at San Marcos Elementary. So that was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun to see those children and be in that environment as well. Any other reports, meetings, conferences, seminars?
So, Madam President, did you and former General Manager Pruitt pick Vallecitos water as the #1 water?
Well, so we were prohibited from collaborating on our answers, and then the answers were not revealed because not all of the VIPs were there, apparently. So it remains to be seen.
I can't wait.
It was a blinded test, so we'll see. Any other conferences, reports, other business? Okay. We have a couple of, well, I guess we need to talk about an upcoming meeting, the San Marcos Chamber of Commerce State of the City address, May 29th at CSUSM. And this is a point of discussion. Are we moving about whether or not this is per diemable, or if, what is the action item?
It's already, there's information only
Okay.
for the board, and if any board members are interested, please let either Ann or Anthony know.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Thank you for that clarification. Any future comments or agenda items that folks would like to see? Okay, seeing none, then we are adjourned. Thank you all.
All right.